Good afternoon, everyone. We will be starting this session very soon, just waiting for another minute or so for all the people who are joining to settle down.
Hi, Harsh. Hi, all. Good afternoon.
Hi, Pratyush. We are live with the session and we'll be starting in another minute since we see people joining in right now. Good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to the annual series of webinar by the Renewable Energy Practice of Marsh India. I'm Harsh Chajir. I take care of the renewable energy practice in Marsh, and I'm also the facilitator for today's event. Parmesh, can we move to the next slide? So today's topic of the webinar is renewable energy, emerging risks and opportunities. And we have split this webinar into three pertinent sessions. First being a panel discussion, which is on opportunities and impact of ESG for renewable energy companies. So to give you a quick background, next slide, Parmesh. Before we jump to the main sessions, a few guidelines to be followed. So all the attendees are automatically muted, but can be unmuted by administrator for Q&A. Attendees can submit questions throughout the webinar using the Q&A tab. If you want to speak during the Q&A session, use the raise hand option in the participants window and we will try and open for your line. Any questions that cannot be answered during the webinar will be collated and answers will be circulated afterwards whenever possible. So the flow of the webinar is, as I said, a panel discussion on impact and importance of ESG for renewable energy companies. We then have opportunities of surety insurance solutions in India, and then a session on battery energy storage systems, the risks, challenges, and solutions. And at the end, we have also kept a dedicated time slot for question and answers. So please feel free, put your questions in the chat, and also you can raise hands at the end for question and answers. So to start with, this is the panel of speakers that we have today. We have industry specialist, Mr. Nishant Kumar, who is the Vice President and Head QHSE and CDP for Ayana Renewables. We have Pratyush Thakur, who is the Investment Director, India, Blue Leaf Energy. We have Martin Beck, who leads the Asia Renewable Practice for Marsh India. We have Christopher Lindsay, who is the Head of Strategy and Growth. We have Akshay Bhardwaj, who is the credit and surety leader for Marsh India, Darren Popham, who is the leader for renewables in Marsh UK. I myself am Harsh Chajer. We have Mark Walshaw, who leads the Middle East and Africa practice for renewable energy at Marsh. So the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals are a common blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. These 17 goals seek to address global challenges, including poverty, inequality, climate change, environmental degradation, peace, and justice. Sustainability in business refers to the effect companies have on the environment and society. It is often illustrated as the balance between people, planet, and profit. ESG is a framework to map out a company's impact on the world and what it is doing about it. To understand this in more detail, let's hear it from our panel of speakers for the discussion. First speaker that we have is Pratyush. Pratyush is the country director of Blue Leaf India. And before joining Blue Leaf, he was with Macquarie Capital, where he led renewables development activities in India. Prior to this, he held leadership positions in solar business and energy trading. Nishant, who leads the ESG practice for Ayana Renewables, has also worked for companies like Sembcorp Green Infra, Leeton, Gati Infrastructure, and Hindustan Coca-Cola. Martin has an experience of managing renewable clients, not just in Asia, but also in the European region. Currently leads the Asia Renewable practice and has overall experience of about 30 gigawatt of renewable energy plants and projects. The discussion will be moderated by Christopher Lindsay. He is the head of strategy and growth, Marsh Advisory Asia. Chris has been helping corporations navigate emerging and complex risks across a variety of industries and regions. So over to you, Chris.
Wonderful. Thank you, Harsh. Fellow panelists in our audience today. It's a real pleasure to be with you all. And look, over the last 6 months, I've had the privilege of working very closely with not only some of our largest clients, but also many of our smaller firms as their leaders look to better integrate ESG into their strategic planning. For many of our clients, renewable energy is a key topic. And while our conversations have traditionally focused on the environmental side, owing to recent geopolitical events, many clients have recently approached us for guidance on how this impacts both the governance and social elements of their ESG strategy. As such, I'm very excited to start the panel discussion today with key leaders in renewable energy. So first question, Nishant.
Chris, can we have the poll questions before we jump to the discussion?
Definitely.
Thank you. And sorry for the interruption here. Okay, so the first question is, are climate sustainability or ESG issues increasingly becoming central to your business? And we see 88% of our audience today says yes. Next question, please. So what are the material ESG issues or drivers of change for your industry? Please pick any of the options that you feel would be the material issue. So we see that sustainability, sourcing of materials, and vulnerability to climate change are the top rated issues with respect to ESG. Great. So let's start the panel discussion, Chris, and see what do our panelists have to say about the overall ESG development in the economy.
Wonderful. Very excited to hear also. So Nishant, first question. As head of ESG for Ayana Renewables, which is a fantastic collaboration between Indian and overseas investors, where does Ayana find the greatest pressure coming from with respect to ESG? Investors, regulators, financial performance, public pressure, etc.
Thanks, Harsh and Marsh team. To this question, I will, not consider this as a pressure from anyone, whether it is regulator or financial investors or others. It's not a pressure. It's basically need of the hour, considering the adverse climate change. And the first question itself suggested, and the answer suggested that now the climate change is in the center of the business. Okay, and as a human, we have learned a lot with our historical mistakes. Either we speak about the London fog disaster, which was a cause of industrialization, or if refer to Indian context, it is like Bhopal gas disaster, after which EPA Act and everything came out, right? So now, rather being reactive, organizations, companies, and society are more proactive. Okay, so I'll not say it is a pressure; it is a need of the hour. Okay, and compliance to ESG requirement and other thing are basically the benchmark setting above the regulatory requirement, because regulations are always at the verge of reform. It is not considering business or economy; it is considering life on the planet and the betterment of life on the planet. So it can always change. If there is something which is endangering life on this planet, it will change. So it is not a regulatory pressure kind of thing. It is something that we need to do for betterment of life. Ultimate aim of business is growth and betterment of life and sustaining it in a better way. Rather. So I don't take it as a considered a pressure or anything else, but it is need of the hour.
Fantastic, thank you. I mean, I think it's a brilliant answer, and obviously we're all here to try to affect change, and it's so much easier when it is more of a pull than a push. So great to hear. To the other panelists, anything to add to that? No, perfect. Very interesting. So Pratyush, so Blueleaf is a portfolio company within Macquarie's Green Investment Group. What ESG associated requirements do you need to comply with? And how do you see them impacting your investments in India?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I'm very happy to be a part of this discussion. And good to have a business guy like me in an ESG conference. So quite interesting to be a part of this. And Nishant put it very well. It's more than compliance or push. It's the pull, which is coming from several stakeholders, which is kind of ensuring that organizations are aligning their activities towards sustainability and focus toward climate change. And Macquarie, one of the largest infrastructure investors in the world, quickly realized that climate change and investment thesis along with that is going to be quite crucial for the world. And they set up Green Investment Group a few years back, which is right now, one of the largest groups of investors sitting anywhere and investing into the space. What we do is that Green Investment Group has an internal green ratings team, which rates every project which comes up for investment. So one may assume that being in renewable generation, you're already, clean and you can have a light touch on ESG. But ESG is much beyond mitigating carbon dioxide emissions, right? Which is what we do when we generate renewable energy. But there are several other elements where you have to see if there is larger impact on the climate, biodiversity, social aspects, if our projects are either mitigating those risks or at least in the best case, avoiding creating any impact on these aspects. So we have a very thorough assessment tool, which is being used by an in-house expert team. And that gives us, for every project, a proactive plan on how to look at these matters and how to manage those during the project, whenever we set up a project. So I feel that's an amazing thing to do, where you're looking at this aspect very early stage rather than reacting to it. And many a time we talk about reporting, but reporting is looking into the rearview mirror on what has happened already. But what is really important is to be proactive, as Nishant said, and having systems and tools in place in the organization. And that's something which I would not say Macquarie requires us to, but actually provides us that intelligence that we're able to deliver on these very well. So yeah, there's this one aspect which is very important, and we have a theme within the organization is to bring dignity to the lives of people we impact. These could be employees in the organization, could be workers working at our site, or the community at large. So there are specific plans on each of these elements in the investments we do and projects we develop to make sure that we are doing something more than what is required by laws, regulations, or internal standards. It's actually creating a good experience for all these stakeholders and providing dignity, because we know in poor countries like India, there are several challenges on ground on the social and these sides. So yeah, with that, I'll just say that there's a lot of work being done, and Macquarie, being one of the largest investors, is giving us guidance on how to do it.
Fantastic. And I think both of you, the answers were, I think, obviously symbolic of the cultures within your organizations and what you both bring to it. One follow-up question again to you both is, do you feel that's systematic across most companies that you engage with? And if not, I guess what drives that culture of wanting to do better?
Nishant, you want to go first?
Yeah, so fine. Again, what drives, again, you can say that, it's focus, and it's coming from the top, it's coming from leadership, it's coming from investment. Like earlier, if you see, it was like a business need, or it was a bottom approach. Once you were pressurized, then only people are trying to do certain things. But now, as it is again a proactive approach, it's coming from top, even investors, or much beyond. If we look at the life cycle assessment of any finance, from top to bottom, the ESG has become an integral aspect of any business or development impact or aspect and everything. And slowly, if I see downtime, like in 2010 or so, these requirements were not there. Again, it was voluntary, but now those voluntary requirements are slowly turning out to be a mandatory requirement. It's not only for organization like where we work or Blue Leaf or somewhere. It's all across the organization that people are trying to go beyond the requirement. And the major thing is that it's not being reactive, and it's a long-term business approach for organizations. So if companies like, say, for example, Coke are there, or 100 years old company, which are being operated for 100 years or plus, if you'll see in core of their business, ESG aspects, social aspects, and everything that sits together. Okay. And that is why they have survived, sustained their business for long. Even the product remains same. If I give example of Coke, the product is same. The company has survived the similar product for a long, long time. Right. So there are so many aspects, different aspects.
Yeah, just to add to that, build upon that. Of course, I have been lucky to work in relatively larger companies where this has been quite core. So just to answer to you, I've seen this in other organizations as well. And to some extent, it's also the responsibility of larger companies to really take these proactive measures and bring it to the market at large. Smaller companies may not have that kind of financial resource and capabilities to do beyond what the legal requirement is. So large companies like the ones we work with a lot of money coming in, they can really set the benchmarks by making sure that these aspects are being looked into, and there is enough resource being provided, either with capital, cost, or human resources to set benchmarks in the industry. So I would say that larger companies are pretty much there in general, and smaller companies would have to do catch up, because these larger companies are their customers or suppliers or some stakeholders who would mandate them to bring up their standards, which we are doing throughout our supply chain.
Brilliant, thank you. Great. Martin, a question for you. So with respect to the clean energy development of the renewable energy companies that you engage with on a daily basis across Asia, how important is climate sustainability to them? And are these clients viewing it as a risk to their business or an opportunity?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chris. Very good question indeed. I think it's worth to mention that our clients in the renewable energy space have a big advantage, and that's they are already developing renewable energy projects, right? So they may have been on this journey for quite a while, and may have it easier here or there compared to, for example, traditional power generators or companies from the oil and gas industry or something else. So the overall journey, I think, is a bit different. And I think the awareness of the climate change and that we need to stop that is, or maybe sometimes, a bit different. So I think the overall view on ESG is very friendly. There is no doubt we need to transition, we need to become more sustainable, and so on and so forth. When you ask me about risks and opportunity, I think there is a fair balance. If we agree we need to transition, and that's not a question, and both Nishant and Patu spoke about that, it's a must, it's not a question. I think clients are typically will to take a bit more risk, and here or there we may have a bit more risk. On the other hand, we also need to question what risks do we have if we don't look into ESG and don't try to transition, and that's important as well. I think very often we too much focus only on the E and lesser on the S and the G. So if I look across all of them, I think it's important to always remember ESG comes in two different stages, right? One is the scope one, so my own company I work for, to what extent are we compliant with the ESG guidelines and so on, in terms of carbon footprint and so on. And then second stage, obviously, which is the much more difficult stage, is how about my clients, my customers, my suppliers and contractors? That's an area where I see a bit of risk when, depending on how strict we are with our own kind of commitment to ESG, if we look into our clients and customers and suppliers, and they may be a bit behind in regards to their development on ESG, that we may lose a bit the selection, right? Even us, we see clients coming to us and say, I can't appoint you when you are not ESG compliant, or at least have a plan. We see the same from the finance sector. So both banks, but in particular insurers, have become quite strict as to where they spend their money. If you are not ESG compliant, or at least have a strict plan for the next 3, 5, 10 years, they may not deploy their capital for your investments. That's a bit the risk I see. The opportunities, of course, again, on one hand, there's no doubt we need to transition, but secondly, I think it will also reduce risk here or there when I see clients, for example, in now not actual today, but in a few years we'll see in India as well, offshore wind, where a huge risk for projects comes from, for example, the fishermen industry, and where for the social point of view, to engage with them, to see how we can develop and operate these projects in collaboration, so to say, it definitely reduces the risk. Also from an insurance perspective, because we would see less damages to these projects from fishermen trawlers and so on. And we see in some areas like D&O insurance, for example, that companies who are a bit more advanced in the ESG journey, we see less claims, right? Because in terms of their risk management and how they manage the company, they are much more aware of the actual risks, and that reduces the likelihood of having claims. So there are lots of opportunities, except or beyond the general point that we just need to transition.
Thank you, Martin. I think some excellent points there, and I think the point you raised about the correlation that we are identifying between strong ESG ratings and claims is quite interesting, and that kind of leads me to my next question, Pratyush. In your view, and I guess also looking at the way that your organization has used tools to assess and rate your subsidiaries and various entities, how do you feel that ESG factors into the overall risk management strategy of a company?
Yeah. So, risk management mostly covers assessing the risk, measuring it, and then having a plan how to mitigate those. And classically, you would say, I've been a risk manager myself, you would look at two aspects. One is the financial aspect, on what kind of financial risk you have, and the other one is the reputational aspect. And for larger companies, I mean, you can't say which one is more important, but both of them are equally important. And when you do a risk management program, you have to look at different stakeholder aspects. It's not the case where companies are only driven by profit to the shareholders, but the profit to shareholder is also impacted by other stakeholders like customers, suppliers, employees, communities, all of them. And in my view, and many of the panelists here and my colleagues shared that the reputational aspects have a direct impact on financial aspects. If your reputation is bad, you will not get customers who will buy your product. You'll not get investors to put money in your projects. You'll not get suppliers to work with you, and no one will join your company, right? So it's very important that all these aspects are being measured properly. Where it becomes challenging is how do you convert these softer elements into real financial values, right? And that's where I think the themes are emerging with more standards coming up on reporting. I think we know that there are several large companies who do reporting, but they do it in their own way. There are no set standards. And once those standards are set and globally accepted, analysts will find ways to value those risks and put that into the overall share value of the company. So I feel that having a proper program to begin with measuring all these risks and what impact it could have on reputation and financial aspects. I'll take one of the social aspects you talked about. Social is so important, especially in India where the population density is so high. We don't have the not in my backyard problem, but we have a problem that if you are in my backyard, you give me jobs, right? And there companies have to really balance between, do I get care for good quality, or I need to give jobs to the local community? Or is there a solution to do both, right? So having those aspects, the social aspects, the governance aspects, where you're very, very transparent with all the stakeholders, you're normally transparent with your investors, but also other stakeholders on how are you recording these elements? Do you have really grievance reportal programs, right? So being very open and transparent will really pave way for companies managing these risks better and actually not getting hit by the impact. Because impact of a not so happy community could be significant delays on projects, and the infra projects we're talking about, a month of delay could be millions of dollars of revenue lost. So that's the way we need to think on ESG risks, that if you're not managing those well, how could that impact in terms of financial aspects?
Thank you. Great answer again. I think obviously the links between risk management and ESG are becoming more and more prevalent. Nishant, quick question for you. Actually, moving maybe a bit more into some specifics. Would you be able to share some market best practices that organizations you've observed are adopting in their sustainability journey?
Sure. So, again, it is a reference to all the discussion that we had, and it's all linked. And so say, for example, now the company is considering development impact. When we talk about ESG, one was that environmental part was on high and social part was a bit less. But now as an organization, we are looking more at the development impact. This is with reference to the 17 SDGs that we have. Okay. So say, for example, when we are doing ESIA, right, which was not a regulatory requirement, but now we conduct those ENS study and everything. And we are also getting down the supply chain. We also understand that, sooner or later, earlier it was not a requirement, it was a voluntary thing, we're doing more environmental and social impact assessment. But now the level of ESG study that goes is slowly getting converted into life cycle assessment. It's like cradle to grave thing. Earlier it was gate to gate or gate to grave or end of life of the plant, but now it is, from the material from where it is getting procured or sourced, or then it is coming to the plant and all those things. So we are getting it to that level. So that is one thing in specific, and we are moving ahead. The reason is also, see, when thermal power plants were invented or when they came in picture, they were the best invention of mankind. It was considered to be, best invention, and it resulted in industrial revolution. But today, again, people are thinking to replace it. right? And similarly, today we are thinking that yes, renewable energy is the best form of energy and it's clean and green energy. But down the line, slowly it will have its impact. The impact will also magnify. So we need to be proactive. We need to look at all the aspects on the natural resource, on the social aspect, on the labor supply chain issues. And we need to manage it within time so that we can take it forward. We can do a few innovative things and again, move ahead. And then in terms of social aspects, so there are a lot of things we do in terms of community engagement, consultation, develop community programs. If we have time, we can also discuss this in detail. This is how we are doing it.
Excellent, thank you. Pritesh, I'm going to just, okay. So in your view, how does ESG compliance or non-compliance affect the investment environment? And where do we see that going in the future?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And actually, there are quite a few trends all of us are already observing how this is impacting the larger markets. The first topic I'll touch about is reporting, which I briefly discussed in the last question, that reporting is one element where there's a lot of focus. Already a task force for climate-related financial reporting is developing standards. There is GRI. There's so many other bodies. We're trying to standardize how sustainability aspects are reported, which gives the analyst ability to value and how that would impact the value of companies. So I believe that that is something which is around the corner and will be very, very important for every company, especially large companies which are traded on markets, to be very good at that. And a related challenge to that is really auditing, right? Because one is putting standards, then you should have the capability to audit that whatever reports have been provided. So auditing standards will need to be developed, right? All those things are in works. I'm not saying anything new, but that's being done right now. But despite that, the investors have now really become sophisticated to call out greenwashing, right? Which has been a pretty standard term where people would fake their data about environmental and say they're very good, right? But now investors, and as you observed with Macquarie, having a group of specialists in-house to make sure that they do understand what is the real impact and real risks. So in public markets, we now see ETFs on sustainability. We've seen green bonds in international markets. Now, even in local markets, there are a couple of green bonds which have come up. So there is a significant interest from investors to do climate financing, and products are being developed in the public market. Similarly, in private markets, the whole the net zero group of asset managers, which is about $53 trillion, is really all those asset managers committing to net zero on or before 2050, right? And they don't have net zero targets in their own operations, but it's actually the investments they're doing into. So the amount of capital which will flow into ESG investing is tremendous, which is going to come up. And many of the large investors are already putting brakes on, okay, we will not fund coal or fossil fuels anymore, which means that will also mitigate any further development of fossil fuels. So the overall investing space is quite excited, and the pandemic has actually catapulted that whole growth, because people have realized that this is one core aspect and there's more money coming into these sectors. So I feel it's very, very exciting times, and companies will be able to quickly adopt high standards, report them properly, and convince the investors that they are doing it very well, will attract a lot of capital.
Fantastic. And that leads, I think, very nicely on to the next question from Martin, which is, obviously, we've talked to the advantages that ESG has for risk management. And we've talked to the advantages that it does have. I think Nishat had a great point earlier today, where a lot of these large companies exist because they've already been doing a lot of this stuff. We've also talked about just then, a lot of capital is now flowing into this market, and that capital has to go somewhere. So I suppose, Martin, in your position as a specialist in risk and insurance, do you see various producers, investors coming to you for risk transfer solutions that are specifically related to climate change or are ESG related? And are these solutions available or becoming available? Where are we?
Yeah, Chris, very good question again. Sure, it's true. There's lots of capital to be spent in this area, right? Because again, everyone recognizes we need to transition, and renewable energy projects become a more and more attractive investment also here in Asia. Asia still deemed to be a bit emerging or immature market. I wouldn't necessarily say that for India, where I think last year they've just crossed the 100 gigawatts of renewable energy projects in operation, which is a massive effort and achievement. But generally in Asia, I would say we are still a bit early stage with regards to renewables. The biggest challenge compared to, for example, Europe, where I would say they are the most mature renewable energy market, is natural catastrophe, which is obviously also part of the entire climate change, with seeing more and more of these catastrophic events coming up here or there, being it floods or bushfires or typhoons and these sorts of things. So when you ask me about risk transfer solutions, that is definitely the most predominant area of concern for our clients, where we need to find solutions when they want to develop projects, for example, in the Philippines. And I know also quite some of the Indian investors are looking into these markets, and Philippines being one of the worst countries in regards to typhoon, to think about how can we hedge or how can we mitigate or transfer that risk to the insurance market, and what's the insurance market's view on that risk? Have they appetite or don't have they? So there's a transfer solution that directly transfer the risk out of the project company or the developer towards someone else, and here in this case, the insurer. We also see clients coming to us asking if we can provide them with kind of a forecast as to how, for the example, flood risk in a certain area may change, right? So you have a specific project site in India, for example, and you've made an assessment on how many floods and how severe they were in the past 30, 40 years, but how will that or may that look like in 20 years? Will they have even more floods, higher floods whatsoever? So that's, again, a bit crystal ball assessment also for us, because it's very difficult to do such an assessment, but we get an idea. And that goes even wider, where producers of drinks, of beverage, ask us, where will we see the highest increase of temperature, because that's likely the area where people will be most thirsty, right? So that's where you build your next production site, things like that. There are many different aspects and topics. I think when you speak about solutions, my last point is very much, and Chris, you know better than I do, as part of the Marsh advisory team, is the advisory piece, right? So one hand is risk transfer solutions. The other part is how can we support our clients? And I'm really thrilled to announce that on Wednesday next week, actually the 9th of March, mixing up here, Marsh is to launch our new ESG risk rating tool, which is a free of charge web-based tool. Obviously, data are 100% secured, where our clients, or even not yet clients, but possibly to be clients, can do an ESG risk rating for either their entire group or for a specific opco, or for, I don't know, a specific project, to see where do we stand with our ESG rating across all the three major sectors, and narrowing it down to, I think, 18 different topics where you can really see, okay, where do we stand? And that's also important for us. So when you question why has Marsh developed something like that, it's because there's direct relations to the insurance market. As I said earlier, there are insurers who are very keen to only deploy capacity for ESG compliant companies. And when you are somewhere at the beginning of the ESG journey to see where do I stand now, maybe in a year's time, you do another risk rating and you see the journey and where you are. And this is obviously also important when we then talk to your insurance markets to convince them that you are worth to be insured, so to say. So really stay tuned for that. Reach out to Marsh. We'll provide you with access to that rating tool. It's again to go online, I think, on Wednesday next week. And I think a great solution to start the conversation about how we can help clients and prospects to become more compliant with ESG. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Martin, and I appreciate the ERR pitch as well. It is a fantastic tool, so do reach out to your March contact if interested. Guys, I think that's all we've got time for today. Unfortunately, I would have loved to have continued this discussion for the next hour and a half, but there are a few other participants who do need to present. So guys, thank you very much for your time. Much appreciated. Harsh, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you so much, Chris. And Pratyush, Nishant, and Martin, thanks a lot for all the inputs. I think we all go back with much more clarity on ESG after this discussion. Coming up next is a presentation on surety. This year, our Honorable Finance Minister in the budget speech had announced that now government projects, government departments will be accepting surety in place of the more expensive bank guarantees, which opens up a whole new opportunity for the sector. And we have Akshay, who is the practice leader for credit insurance, structured finance, and sureties, to speak on surety solutions for the renewable energy industry. Akshay, over to you. Akshay, I believe, can everyone hear Akshay?
No, Harsh, you're not able to hear Akshay.
Akshay, could you check your microphone, please?
Hi, Akshay, can you hear us? You're not audible, Akshay.
I would suggest, Akshay, would you mind logging off and logging in again? We'll continue with the next session and come back to surety at the end of this. So the next session that we have is on battery energy storage systems. As we all know that for renewable energy to become mainstream, the area which is always been an apprehension is the intermittent nature of renewable energy. And I believe that battery energy storage systems is the solution to it. And we already have seen all across the world various developments with respect to it. Recently in India as well, we have seen a lot of activity happening, a lot of projects getting planned. And that's why we have our global experts, Darren Popham, Mark Walshaw, and myself will be speaking on battery energy storage, risks, challenges, and solutions. Before that, we have
yes. I'm going to say let's move to the question first.
Yeah.
So in terms of kicking this off, to what extent do you think battery energy storage systems will help enhance and mainstream renewable power generation? So looking to get your feedback on this. Wow, so extremely high response for significant positive effect. And certainly, I'd hope this upcoming discussion can give you a bit of an idea as to why that is so and why there's so much of a hype and demand for battery energy storage today. So as Harsh mentioned, one of the critical challenges of the energy transition is actually addressing the intermittency of renewable energy. So how do we power our homes and businesses when the wind stops blowing and the sun isn't shining? And this increasing penetration of renewables is demanding more flexibility of the power grid to balance supply and demand. And renewable energy can be stored in these utility scale battery systems with the power released to the grid when it's required. And yes, that optimization will allow the provision of power at both peak and non-peak times. And in addition, battery energy storage can offer a substantial technical advantage over some of the conventional generation units in terms of their load shifting capacities as well. So thanks to their fast ramping rate, they can respond very quickly. So there's real benefits of battery energy storage. And the industry's now seeing battery being integrated with solar and wind farms to feed into national grids. Or even as well, we're seeing batteries being used to provide an intermediate holding of power within some of the major integrated projects we're seeing globally, particularly green hydrogen production and export as well. So there's two key factors that are really driving the growth and enabling wider implementation of battery energy storage systems. Firstly, technological advances. They've increased storage capacity, meaning cells are now holding more power than ever. And secondly, the scale up and efficiency of manufacture has meant that the cost of battery energy units are rapidly declining as well. I guess in terms of quantifying that, a recent survey done by Bloomberg has said that the demand for lithium-ion batteries will increase 9-fold in 2030 from where it is today. So from 1,000 gigawatt hours up to 9,000. And then the costs per unit storage has also dropped 7-fold over the past decade, as you can see by the two charts on the screen. And I'd say as well, locally in India, the demand for batteries is really clear. We're hearing the high levels of interest that there is and the real buzz that there is in the country. It's been supported as well from a governmental perspective, with Modi and his cabinet implementing a national mission recently to promote battery energy production and implementation to complete globally. And we're seeing this as a 5-year phased manufacturing program, which is going to involve the cell manufacturing gigaplants, really focusing on local manufacturing and the full supply chain, including EVs as well. So that gives you an overview of the industry. And I guess what I want to do now is move into more of the technological side, giving you a sense of what technologies are prevalent today and their potential advancements as well. So with all the battery types in use today, lithium ions are clearly the most dominant. And that's supported by emerging large economies of scale and those major cost reductions that I've mentioned previously. And I would say lithium-ion systems are set to maintain this dominance, certainly in the short term, and potentially through to the end of this decade. But what I'd say is, given the developments of battery energy technologies and the diverse needs of grids and projects, the expectation is that multiple technologies will prevail. And this dominant position of lithium-ion may well change in the future. I guess looking at the more commercially available types today, so being lithium-ion, the sodium salt, lead acid, and flow, which I mentioned in the top left there, the combination of these 4 types is representing more than 95% of global battery capacity of utility-scale batteries today. And between these 4 technologies, they vary in terms of their maturity, discharge rates, sustainability of materials, which links well into the ESG conversation, and also finally cost. So the advantages and disadvantages of each need to be considered alongside the requirements of a specific project. And there's other battery types, such as the hybrid ultra battery or the electrochemical zinc air system. They're still undergoing development and scale up. There's certainly a lot of focus and will need to be on proving these potentially prototypical technologies, and steps from OEMs and developers will be needed to prove that and build the safety confidence in these technologies for their implementation going forward. At the bottom, brief overview of the physical setup of battery systems and how we see them being built up as well. From the individual cells, then being encased within modules, and we can get up to 45 cells within a module. These modules then form a rack, and we could get 50 to 100 kilowatt hours per rack typically. And then these racks then feeding into an enclosure, which could be from 2 to 10 megawatt hours per enclosure. And then these enclosures linking into the converters and downstream equipment. What I would say at cell and module levels, one of the real safety factors that we see is that there's battery management systems in place. These are monitoring the thermal management and also the control to prevent battery abuse and failure. And these are very important. The battery management systems often housed external to the battery enclosure to prevent any heat transfer, and often links into fire protection systems as well to enable a prompt emergency response if ever required. So this gives you a sense of some of the initial build-up and setup of these designs. But what I want to do just on my final slide before moving on to my colleagues is speak about the operational risks and move on to the next slide. So in terms of operational considerations, one of the largest exposures we see in the industry is thermal runaway. This is a chain reaction where a damaged battery releases energy in the form of heat and creates a self-perpetuating loop resulting in rapid heating. If this is left unchecked, the heat generated by a single cell can then damage adjacent cells, or in some cases, that's enough to cause a fire. And battery fires have occurred across almost every region. There's some notable losses in 2017, 2018 within South Korea. We're also seeing as well losses in Europe and US as well, with these being some of the early adopters of this utility scale technology. But I would say that this thermal runaway mechanism is not unique to a particular manufacturer or design. The hazard itself is inherent within best technologies. But there's been multiple lessons that have been learned from these loss events, with the following being contributing factors. Lack of temperature control, which has meant the cells have experienced that thermal abuse. So having process control systems in place can certainly, and then to manage that and also as well have them separate from the cell and the enclosure itself is certainly beneficial. It's taking steps to mitigate any inherent cell defects. That could be ensuring no negligence during construction, ensuring no impacts and abuse during transit in the construction process itself. And then thirdly, I'd say ensuring you've got stable operation of the battery system and ensuring there's no excursions out of any of the prescribed parameters, so temperatures, charge rates, etc. And what I'd say that in looking at the design and configuration outside of the enclosure itself, this is also very important to containing the risk. And this falls into equipment separation. And that's certainly got a lot of focus today, particularly within insurance too, and general risk management for developers. So when assessing the design of an installation, there has to be sufficient separation between each of the enclosures themselves, and minimum guidelines for this as per NFPA is around 3 meters. But what we're seeing in certain developers is highest space separation of up to 7.5 meters being used to help mitigate that risk even further. So going beyond those guidelines. And in addition to that, there also needs to be good separation between the enclosures themselves and critical infrastructure, such as transformers and substations. And those critical pieces of equipment are important as well for the third element, the business interruption. And operational resilience needs to also be considered within design. So minimizing single points of failure will help to minimize the impact on revenue should there be a loss. There's also design considerations where projects where the power is routed from the renewable energy facility into a grid rather than direct to a downstream use can also be advantageous as well. This redundancy of the grid connection and the flexibility that that can bring can certainly help to safeguard any of the downstream processes in the event there is a loss. So I trust that gives you a good overview of some of the design considerations that can be considered and what is being best practice within the industry. And there's certainly a new, more standards being enforced that are relevant to the design and deployment of best systems. But what I'd say is the technology and industry is continuing to develop. It's constantly innovating to improve the value for implementation, but also those safety factors too. And these standards are only going to evolve more and more in response to learnings from events, and certainly getting that view and learnings from global experience and also technical experts as well in this field will be important. So getting that early engagement with them is certainly beneficial. Now, what I want to do is move over to Harsh for a second poll question. Harsh?
Yes, please. Thank you so much, Mark. So the next poll question is, what do you foresee as the biggest challenges for battery energy storage system? Is it technical expertise, regulatory policies, management of operation risks, high capital investment, access to affordable green capital? Okay.
Interesting that cost is the most prevalent. Well, certainly, if we continue at the same pace that we're seeing, that may well be improving. And certainly, there's with the different battery types, there's ways to look at cost and potentially choose something more cost effective, which may not have the same sort of discharge rate, but again, it could be suitable for your projects that you're developing. So certainly flexibility is best.
Thank you so much, Mark. And I would like to invite Darren to take us through the challenges that one can face in the international insurance market towards placing insurances with respect to battery energy storage systems, and also the ways and processes that will be required to do so. Darren, over to you.
Thank you very much, Harsh. Hopefully everyone can hear me. So it's very interesting to see the results of that poll. I just wrote down two numbers: 45% went with cost and 23% went on technical. Both of those I think I will touch on my part of the presentation. So I just want to first thank Mark for taking us through the engineering overview on the BESS projects, which I think we'll all have seen was very insightful. It's clear that an engineering perspective on these risks is key, and it's also very key to insurability. And whilst I'm here to talk about the insurance market and how it's responded to the challenges of BESS projects, I first wanted to just make a few highlights, actually. So as most on this call will know, renewable energy has increased their share in global electricity generation. And it's likely to reach somewhere in the region of 45% of the total generation by 2040. And of course, clean energy has gained popularity as well, as becoming more economically viable. Obviously, it's eco-friendly, alternative to fossil fuels. And so we're seeing a lot more integration of battery energy storage systems on a number of areas, both on-grid, off-grid, and looking at hybrid systems. So really, the battery storage enhances the efficiency of renewables, and India already has a very significant renewables power generation market. So it becomes a very reliable energy source in a variety of applications, whether it be on PV panels or maybe off-grid commercial facilities, and also for isolated communities and so like remote rural areas. So on BESS in general, we have seen large-scale BESS being deployed now all over the world, including the United States, Australia, the United Kingdom, and in the Far East as well. And with India having a very ambitious goal, I think it's 450 gigawatt of renewable energy by 2030, then BESS is going to have to form a significant part of that. I was doing a bit of research, as people may be able to tell, and I saw that the Solar Energy Corporation of India issued in October 2021 a request of expression of interest for a 1,000 megawatt hour battery energy storage system as a pilot project. So it's clearly on its way to India if it's not already there. So I was asked really to touch on some of the insurance implications and the insurance market position, and how the London and international insurance market has responded to the challenges of this new technology. So just a few highlights, and I'm not one for reading through word by word on the slide, as you can tell, so please do review the information on the slides as well. But I've really split this into three main areas. One is capacity, and that's really the way that insurers look at risks and how they may deploy their risk to different projects that they see. And it's fair to say that the best market is still quite an immature market, with insurers still considering their position. There has been a number of high-profile losses, and these are all available on the internet. There was a significant fire on a risk in Australia. There's over 20 fires have happened in Korea. There was one in Liverpool in the UK, so people will recognise Liverpool, I'm sure, and also quite a significant one in Arizona in the United States. And because of these high-profile losses, it is making the insurance community quite cautious with the way they respond to these projects. So we do see a number of different approaches from insurers, but one of the key areas that we see, and this is what Mark was explaining, is that engineering is key, and also that proven technology is vital. And Mark again touched on the market is moving, it's evolving very quickly, and understanding that the technology is understood and proven is something that we find that insurers are really focused on. So what we find is that the insurers are deploying a relatively low amount of capacity. So that's how much share they will take of a risk. And that is due to the perceived high loss potential. And the main high loss potential, again, keep referring to Mark because it's so important, is due to the thermal runaway. That's why they are deploying a low level of capacity. They are concerned that they may lose a significant amount of a project in the event of a fire happening. However, I actually think it will improve. I think more insurers will start to come into this market. And traditionally, the Indian insurance market has had a great reputation for responding to new trends and sectors. And this is something Harsh is going to pick up in his slide shortly. So just to move on to pricing briefly, my perception at the moment is that the insurers are actually quite fixed on their pricing levels. And because there is limited competition amongst the insurers, it has actually driven prices quite high in what was already quite a tough insurance market. The insurance market works in cycles, and a lot of these battery projects have come to market at a time when the costs were already quite high. So the main areas we need to see is we need to make sure we're distinguishing between the technology types with insurers, as currently they see a battery risk as a battery risk, and they're not really looking at the different types that Mark alluded to. So we need to make sure the projects are put to insurers, and the different technology types and compliance with standards are all fully understood and appreciated by the insurers. So just wanted to touch briefly on a couple of the key terms we're seeing. There does tend to be a high excess or deductible for the thermal runaway event. Insurers will insist on compliance with the various codes that are applicable to battery storage, and we can provide more details to the participants if necessary on the expected codes. And one of the things we do find the insurers are asking all the time on is details on the engagement that the project companies are having with the local firefighters. And I don't get that on all projects, just to be clear. It's quite a specific request we get from the insurers looking at best projects. So maybe if you could just step forward onto the next slide, where I just want to take you briefly through the project life cycle and how we can we as Marsh can maybe help on some of the areas that you might be looking at. So it's very important that your risk is really well positioned with insurers and perceived as insurable throughout the whole project life cycle. And we'll support you on the different phases of the project. So during the design phase, we can look at not only contractual review and risk allocation, but look at the engineering support to ensure that the proposed design of a project gives you the opportunity to obtain the best terms from the insurance market. And of course, we're very used to working with you and your lenders and your lenders insurance advisors to ensure that the insurances are a bankable solution and is provided on time and on budget. And it's important there to make sure that lenders and their insurance advisors are also up to date on the developments in the battery storage market. It's quite important there. So looking at the during the construction phase, we've highlighted some of the policies we would typically look at ensuring have been either purchased or allocated to different parties. And we can continue to support you by offering engineering services, risk management support as you look towards moving to the operational phase. So hopefully, and this is a real key point I want to get across, is that the structured methodology that you will have followed through the design phase and the construction phase should enable you to effect a cost-effective and competitive insurance program for the operational phase. That is key. Coming back to the 45% that mentioned cost on the survey, the insurance cost will be one of the highest ongoing costs of a BESS project. And therefore, we don't like talking about insurance too much, but insurance should be a high profile item when you are looking at your longer term insurance and financial models. Insurance is going to be a key cost. So we can support you throughout this phase of a project, as well, of course, continued risk management support and looking at the business interruption reviews, for example, to ensure that it matches your revenue profile. We have put on here decommissioning. I'm not going to say much more because we've not actually seen many projects reach the decommissioning phase. But in conclusion, I just want to finish with actually going back to where I started. Adopting an engineering-focused approach which understands the requirements and expectations of insurers is vital to ensuring that long-term insurability of your project. That's vital for me. Harsh, that was me done.
Thank you so much, Darren. So as you all saw Mark speaking on the risks related to battery energy storage systems, Darren talking about what have been the challenges with respect to the kind of insurance placements that have been happening globally. And Marsh has been experiencing, battery energy storage systems, not just in one particular country, but in multiple regions. So coming to how we in India are all geared up with a value proposition, which will be very supportive, is we know that currently battery energy storage in India is at a planning phase. So this is where, the risk planning for that particular project also needs to start. And that's where we come in. We start with having a proper risk mapping plan for you, which can help you understand and allocate risks in the right buckets. Then comes the whole NatCat analysis where, Darren was mentioning about how risk engineering is important. And NatCat is one of the aspects of risk engineering. Overall, if I have to say, risk engineering will make the project more marketable with the insurers, wherein Darren already mentioned that, this is a high profile cost item when it comes to BESS insurance solutions. So what we need to look at is that how well have we understood the risks and how well have we represented the risks so that the markets also have the same understanding and can rate the risk accordingly. We've had multiple discussions with insurers on this, and they have been saying that, the better representation we get, the better capacity is what we can deploy for these projects, because it's a new risk for them also to understand the loss trends. It's going to be the first time. Coming to stakeholder management, another area where Marsh is completely equipped in order to understand and also allocate who is responsible for taking insurance and managing a particular risk of that project. Is it your contractor? Is it your principal, or is it a third party which has to be a part of the overall stakeholders? So that is something which we can actually sit with you, plan, and also form clauses accordingly in the contracts that you will be signing. Fourth is what Darren and Mark have already spoken. We are present in multiple markets. We have experienced the risk, and all those markets and their insurance capacity can be approached for even for India's projects that will be coming up. And last but the most important is policy wordings. This is not a project which has been happening in India or happening in the world, pretty long back. So it has to have bespoke policy wordings, which can actually talk to the risks of the project and can actually try to cover it in the line of sight towards what we see can be the loss trends for these kind of projects, or can be the vulnerabilities of these projects. So Marsh being already experiencing this risk for quite some time now globally, we can replicate these solutions for the Indian risks as well. Thank you so much. We will now jump to our next session, which is on surety. I believe, Akshay, you are available now. Could you just quickly do a mic check?
Yes, I am. Hope I'm audible now.
You're very well audible. My apologies to all our audience for a little glitch. And we now have Akshay, who will be talking on surety and the opportunity that it brings for the with the latest announcements that have happened in India. Just moving to the surety slides. Over to
Thank you,
Harsh.
Harsh. I know that we are having crunch of time, so I'll not take much of the time, rather focus on the crux. It's a fantastic thing which has come up, and I think we are pretty thankful to Finance Ministry as well as our regulator IIT for getting this done. Harsh, can we move to the next slide, please? So broadly, the product was always there till 1990s, but not very popular per se. Insurance didn't have much presence in India, but banks became pretty competitive in 90s, and somehow this product lost its flavor from the market. But with NPAs rising and the situation around contractors tightening, led to a lot of representation. We are thankful to a lot of clients, many of us here, who raised it at various platforms, basis which committee was formed, draft guidelines were shared, which had a lot of stakeholders from the industry, from insurance, from broking, from reinsurance. And third gen, the guarantee guidelines were issued, and these are effective from 1st of April. Now, broadly, the core reason have been to support IPPs or contractors, because with time, many of these companies are facing challenges where to issue even performance guarantees or basic guarantees, they have to give 100 to 120% of collateral plus margin, which was taking a lot of toll on overall costing. In recent past, the cost of PVs, etc., have gone up. Because of lockdown, which we faced last 2 years, there were a lot of delays. Now, this all created a lot of cash crunch, or in terms of overall financial crunch for the segment. And I think the whole idea of bringing sureties was to this. Next slide, please. Now, broadly, what is surety? Surety is as simple as a bank guarantee, wherein there is an insurer, earlier it was a banker, who can issue a surety on behalf of a contractor to the beneficiary or the project owner. Surety bond basically guarantees a project owner that the contractor will fulfill the terms of the contract, and if something goes wrong, they will make good of the loss. Globally, surety works as an alternative to a bank guarantee. It can also work in collaboration. Marsh does a lot of bank surety syndication, though I don't foresee it happening immediately in India. Long way to go, maybe 2 to 3 years, but this is going to stay and give a lot of comfort to the contractors in terms of availing large size non-funded lines. Now, broadly, and I'm just taking it, looking at the paucity of time, I'll just give you the fundamental difference why sureties will make a difference. So when a bank does lending, Harsh, the last slide, just 1 point and then we can come here. Last slide. I think we are going in a fast forward mode. Can we go a slide back, 2 slides back, please? 2 slides back. Okay. The fundamental difference is when a banker looks at a balance sheet, he does more of objective assessment of the balance sheet. The subjectivity portion, like past track record, who's the principal, what type of capacities, etc., is something which is which has lesser weightage. Unlike a surety underwriter who starts or whose underwriting philosophy is based on the probability of loss. So the subjective parameters have a more say in their assessment. So for the same balance sheet, if a banker with collateral may issue $100 of guarantee, a surety underwriter probably can do 120 or 150 without collateral. So I think that makes it fundamentally different from bank guarantees and more flexible and versatile. Harsh, can we go back to the last slide, please? Last slide, where the chart was there. So I just give the, just start from start. Just an animation to give you a perspective. So there is a contractor, a principal owner. When the award is when the contract is awarded, sureties are demanded. We come into play. We help the contractors find the right surety company. Now, the beauty of this contract is that the indemnity document, which typically in other insurances, indemnity is typically when a claim is established and subrogation happens. But over here, the indemnity is signed upfront, which broadly means that if the guarantee is invoked, then the insurance company will come and collect the sum and a bond is issued. Now, unfortunately, if the contractor fails to perform or there is a breach of contract, the project owner will invoke the bond, the insurance company will pay and collect and exercise subrogation rights. Perfect, Harsh. We can move to the next slide. Now, broadly, if we see the difference, one, as I said, in terms of security, while bank lines are generally collateralized, plus they have a margin requirement, sureties do not work on that fashion. So there is no collateral, and rarely I have seen people asking for margins. Qualification, as I said, while bank will have, and bank and surety companies both have the same parameters, the weightage of subjective parameters is more in case of a surety. Duration of the bank guarantee or surety is the same, whether it is bank guarantee or surety, it is aligned to the overall contract. The only thing which I see in case of India would be that probably first few years, the underwriters would not be able to give a 10, 20, 30 year of guarantees. Rather, they are looking at a shorter time period. Pricing, yes, over here, sureties wins for the simple reason insurance industry per se have access to maybe more cheaper capital vis-a-vis bank, plus they do not have very stringent norms which are more aligned to Basel norms. So underwriters have more flexibility, and thus it also impacts the pricing. Our claims process is the same, while a bank will have collaterals and margins to take care of. A surety underwriter, since they have signed an indemnity, once the bond is called, they will come for subrogation. Next slide, please. I have already spoken about it, but what surety does is, one, it gives you additional capacity. Second, it reduces your dependence on banks. Third, many markets in Americas, and you will realize that I think Ministry of Finance has already made an amendment to procurement policy on 2nd of Feb, where they said that for bid and performance guarantee, all central government agencies will be asking for, or will be giving the contractor an option to give a surety as well. So earlier it was restricted to bank guarantees and bank instruments. Now you have an option to give surety as well. You can diversify your source of guarantors. It frees up your bank lines. And generally, 90% of the sureties are conditional, where in case if somebody wants to invoke the bond, they will have to admit that the contractor is at default in detail to the insurer. So God forbid if there is a wrong call, or what we say wrongful call by the principal, then an insurer and contractor have something against him substantial in court of law to recover wrongful calling of bonds. Next slide, Harsh. India side, so broadly what India has allowed, one, they have allowed contract bonds, that is bid, advance, performance guarantees, and retention bonds. All four are available. Custom bonds for imports and code bonds, this is allowed. Financial guarantee have not been allowed in India, though popular globally. Second, what they have defined contract is, or bond is, as a contract of guarantee under Section 126 of Indian Contract Act. Another highlight is that rather like how globally we have facilities, here project-wise surety would be issued, and the sum total of all sureties issued, or the peak exposure, should not exceed 30% of the project value. But generally, I have not seen it exceeding, or it hovers around 20-25%. I have not seen going 30%. There are some exceptions where it is more, but those are exceptions. In general, 30% is a good line. One thing which they have done is that they want sureties to be issued locally only in INR. For your export projects, probably you cannot use it. Another aspect is where IRDA has suggested that they would want only companies, insurance companies, which are very strong with very strong financials to actually issue sureties. So they have put a solvency margin cap that it has to be minimum 1.85. So out of 35 odd companies, only 13 or 14 qualify to issue surety who have good financial rating. Second is, or the last one is that the insurers cannot write more than 10% of their total premium, or 500 crore, whichever is lower, per annum in 1 year. I think this is broadly to ensure that insurers do not go overboard, because this is one area which can be actually risky for the overall industry. So this is what the regulations broadly say. Next slide, please. Way forward. Now, this is where, after the guidelines have come in, a few suggestions from industry. Many of you have come back with this. One is that industry is looking that IDA should amend and increase, the government should increase the purview of IBC, that is Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, to include surety companies. Because if you look at global surety market, what the top leaders who want to come to India, because India is a huge market for them, their concern is not a $50, $100 million loss, but the concern is a 20-year litigation. I think that is where the concern is. So if they have an access to IBC, probably they can go to the court of law, finish the case in a specified time. And second is obviously what they want is some sort of a support in ensuring surety companies have subrogation right to take over the project. If the contractor has left the project midway, they should have the right to take the subrogation, finish the project and deliver it to the principal. And I think that is what every principal is looking at. Second is obviously a robust reinsurance support is required for sureties. Currently, we do not have that, but there are parallels globally, like SBA Surety Bond Guarantee Scheme in US, wherein government intervenes and supports sureties. Third very critical thing is with respect to data share. Now, we do not want to create the regulators' thoughts are that we do not want to create a platform where somebody defaults to a bank and uses surety to conduct business, or defaults to surety and uses banks to conduct the business. The idea is that this transparency and market discipline is required, for which ask item from the industry is that the sureties and banks should be contributing to the CRILIC or CIBIL database to ensure that the contractors are in check. Broadly, that's all from my side. I was given a specific time frame to finish it. Though it's a very deep subject, I'm happy to address queries. Over to you, Harsh.
Thank you so much, Akshay. And now we would jump to our question and answers. If there are any questions, you can also write it on the Q&A tab. And if you would like to ask it, please raise your hand and we'll try to open your lines. We already have 2 questions on the Q&A tab. The first question, maybe Mark, you can take it. Whether battery energy storage solutions will be of gigawatt or utility scale?
Okay. I'm happy to give a little bit of an insight to what scale is being seen globally. So I guess in terms of some of the more mature regions that we're seeing battery energy deployment, so Australia, for example, the largest facility that's over there at the minute is the Victoria Big Battery. So that's 300 megawatts worth of storage. Also in the US, there's another facility at 300 megawatts, which is Moss Landing in California. So it gives you a bit of a sense of the size and scale of that. I know there's multiple announcements that are coming out for facilities globally that are in excess of 300. I heard one fairly recently about a facility in the UK that was due to be 360 megawatts, for example. And I think that just speaks to the real growth that is anticipated globally for BESS. Looking at the US, if I just take that as an example, I can see that their battery energy storage capacity today is 2.6 gigawatts. That's due to increase to 12 gigawatts by end of 2024. So in such a short space of time, it's going up 5-fold. It's, I think that's indicative of the industry, and I guess all of the factors at play of increased efficiency, lower cost, etc., that are all supporting that too.
Great, thank you so much, Mark. Coming to our next question, again on battery energy storage. It's to do with Marsh's bespoke wordings for BESS. Darren, would you like to highlight on that?
Yeah, sure, Harsh. Thanks for that. So, Marsh and generally on renewables projects, we've always looked to put in place specific wordings drafted based on the knowledge of a risk and to cover the risk requirements of the clients. So we do have a base set of wordings that we would use for all of our different renewable energy technology choices. But we would always look to work with a client to draft it bespoke to that risk and to make sure it's given the widest cover based on that client's own preferred risk transfer profile.
Thank you so much. Akshay, there's a question. I believe you were typing on the chat.
Yeah, I've already answered.
Just for the benefit of all, would you like to just speak it out?
No, it was
well?
about the premium payment about surety. The question was whether it would be payable monthly or annually, but it is basically annual. It depends upon what type of project it is. Annual.
Great, thank you so much. Are there any more questions that we can answer? If anyone would like to, ask the question live on the webinar, please raise your hand, or you can also type in the question in the Q&A tab.
Harsh, did you want me to take the one that's been raised by Jan, which was about whether insurers in India will be able to offer risk-relevant coverage for battery energy storage projects?
Sure, Darren, please go ahead.
Okay, so I think just sort of like, but the risks for battery energy storage projects are very similar to most power generation risks, and they'll fall into the construction phase for marine cargo, the liability, the damage to asset, and the associated loss of revenues as being the traditional insurances. And in the operational phase, again, it'll be the liability, property damage, and loss of revenue covers. And I wouldn't see any reason why the Indian insurance market wouldn't, as I mentioned earlier, respond and adapt very quickly to risk-relevant coverage for both projects. The wordings and scope of cover would be quite similar to other renewable energy risks. There may be some specific clauses that could look to apply, in particular, serious loss clause. There may be conditions around separation between battery containers. But generally, as Harsh can maybe expand on, the insurance market in India has always responded very positively to new technology and advancements in project types.
So yes, Darren, as you rightly said, that we've had some initial discussions with the insurers in India, and on the contrary to what we see in the London market or in the global markets, we have seen that they're open to having discussions and seeing how they can provide a solution around it. And they have in fact asked us to help them, draft wordings around the coverages that will be required. In fact, they're also trying to understand how this particular technology works, what are the types of technologies. So yes, I can say that yes, insurers in India are looking forward, and they will surely look at it from a very positive mindset. Coming to the next question, we have an anonymous attendee whose question is, since battery costs are increasing due to EV market demand, are battery energy storage projects in India going to be feasible at this point of time? So just to answer this bit, I'll take this one. While we're talking about battery costs which are increasing due to EV market demand, but at the same time, as we already spoke, that by 2030, we see that India will have an installed capacity of 450 gigawatt. And to actually make it mainstream power supply, we need to have this intermittent nature of renewable energy go away. And it's only battery energy storage that can help us do that. So from that perspective, battery energy storage projects in India will become feasible. They will take a little bit of time because of the technology development and the evolution of the overall technology. But looking at the discussions that we've had with our clients on the initial level, and also the global clients with whom we've worked, we see that the direction in which the entire industry is moving is very positive.
Marsh, if I could just build, if I could just build upon that as well. I mean, great answer from yourself, and I'd say on the government side as well. I touched upon the National Mission for Transformative Mobility and Battery Storage. So that's, I guess, that growth that's required to meet the increasing demand. There needs to be that supply, and that supply is being set up to generate those large-scale export competitive batteries and have those giga plants for cell manufacture within India itself. So, as you said, that demand's going to increase, but there's going to be a big step up in local development of batteries to be able to feed that.
Absolutely, Mark. Very well put. So I believe we are already at 4:30 and we've exceeded our time by 15 minutes. Thank you so much for being patient with us. And I believe there might be a few more questions, but since we are looking at the paucity of time, please reach out to the team which is mentioned over here, very much available. And we have a complete setup of renewable energy practice, not just at an India level, but also at an Asia and a global level. We have all the global leaders with us today, various of them. So absolutely reach out whenever required, and we can help you out with the requirements related to insurances with respect to renewable energy assets. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot for your time. Thanks
Thank
a lot
you.
to all the speakers as well.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.